The day we moved into Oakwood Estates was everything we had dreamed about for years. The sun cast golden light across our new driveway as the moving truck backed up to our front door. My husband Michael carried box after box, while I helped our 15-year-old daughter Emma navigate the temporary wooden ramp we had constructed over the front steps. Her wheelchair wheels bumped slightly on each seam of the plywood. "Soon we will have a proper ramp installed," I promised, squeezing her shoulder gently. Emma smiled up at me, her blue eyes bright with excitement despite the fatigue of moving day. "I love it already, Mom," she said, gazing at the spacious living room with its wide doorways and open floor plan. "I can actually move around in here without bumping into everything." Our previous apartment had been a nightmare of narrow hallways and tight corners. We had spent 3 years saving for this house, specifically chosen because the single-story layout could be easily modified for Emma's spinal muscular atrophy. The large backyard was the main selling point. Emma's physical therapist had long recommended a sensory garden with various textures and therapeutic equipment to help maintain her muscle strength and sensory processing. The doorbell rang just as Michael was assembling Emma's bed. A middle-aged woman with short blonde hair stood on our porch holding a wicker basket filled with muffins and a potted plant. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates," she said with a warm smile. "I am Janet from 3 doors down. We are so happy to have a new family join the neighborhood." More neighbors arrived throughout the day bearing welcome gifts and friendly smiles. The Johnson family brought homemade cookies. The Garcias offered to help unpack. The Williams family invited us to their barbecue the following weekend. For the first time since Emma's diagnosis 7 years ago, I felt we might have found not just a house but a true community. The Williams barbecue was in full swing when we arrived that Saturday. Children played on a tire swing while adults clustered around the grill, plastic cups of lemonade in hand. Emma was immediately invited to join a board game on the patio table, which had been positioned to accommodate her wheelchair. "You must be the new family on Maple Drive," said a sharp voice behind me. I turned to find a tall woman with immaculate makeup and a designer sundress extending a manicured hand. "I am Patricia Winters, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association." Her smile was practiced and perfect, but her eyes remained cold as they flicked over my casual outfit before settling on Emma across the yard. Something in her gaze made me uncomfortable, a calculating assessment rather than genuine interest. "We are so pleased to be here," I replied, shaking her hand. "Everyone has been incredibly welcoming." Patricia nodded and reached into an expensive-looking handbag, producing a thick black binder embossed with gold letters. "Oakwood Estates HOA Guidelines and Regulations." "We pride ourselves on maintaining standards here," she said, her eyes lingering on Emma's wheelchair ramp visible from the side yard. "All exterior modifications must be approved by the board before installation. No exceptions." 2 weeks later, we received our first citation in the mailbox. The envelope contained a formal notice of violation regarding the unauthorized installation of non-standard garden features in our backyard. The features in question were the textured stepping stones and low-sensory wall the physical therapist had helped us install for Emma's therapy. "This has to be a misunderstanding," Michael said as we read through the citation. "We will just explain Emma's medical needs and fill out whatever forms they require." I nodded, still optimistic that once we explained our daughter's condition, the HOA would understand the necessity of these modifications. We drafted a polite letter explaining Emma's diagnosis and attached literature from her doctors about the therapeutic benefits of sensory gardens for neuromuscular conditions. The guidelines exist for everyone's benefit, Patricia explained coolly when we met with her at the HOA office the following Monday. We cannot simply allow exceptions because they are convenient for one family. These are not convenience modifications, I explained patiently. They are medical necessities for Emma's condition. Patricia smiled thinly and pushed a stack of application forms across her desk. Fill these out in triplicate. The board will review your request at next month's meeting. As we walked back to our car, I could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles. Little did I know then just how right that instinct would prove to be, or how dangerous Patricia's obsession with rules would become for our family. The manila envelopes began appearing in our mailbox with alarming frequency. Each contained another HOA violation notice with Patricia's signature at the bottom, her handwriting sharp and precise. The therapeutic swing installed for Emma's sensory processing disorder, violation. The textured pathway allowing her wheelchair better access to the garden, violation. The special UV protective awning for her son's sensitivity, violation. This is getting ridiculous, Michael muttered one evening, tossing the latest notice onto our growing pile. We have submitted all the proper paperwork. We have provided doctors' letters. What more do they want from us? I stared out the window at our backyard, where Emma was reading a book beneath the awning that Patricia had deemed not aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards. My daughter looked peaceful there, the filtered light protecting her sensitive skin while allowing her to enjoy the outdoors. I think this is personal, I said quietly. Have you noticed we are the only ones receiving these notices? The Andersons built an entire shed last month without any issues. Our suspicions were confirmed when Janet from down the street stopped by with a worried expression. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, she whispered, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard, but Patricia has been talking about your property at her weekly bridge club. She seems fixated on what she calls your excessive modifications. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a brick building with a too-small parking lot and exactly one handicap space, which was occupied by a luxury SUV with no disabled placard. Michael had to drop Emma and me at the door before parking 2 blocks away. The community room fell silent as we entered, Emma's wheelchair making a soft whirring sound against the polished floor. Approximately 30 neighbors sat in neat rows of folding chairs, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort as we positioned ourselves in the back. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I raised my hand and was acknowledged with obvious reluctance. I wheeled Emma to the front of the room and spoke clearly into the microphone. My name is Sarah Collins. My family moved to Oakwood Estates 3 months ago. My daughter Emma has spinal muscular atrophy, a progressive neuromuscular disorder that requires specific accommodations for her health and safety. We have received multiple violation notices regarding medically necessary modifications to our property. I would like to request a blanket medical exemption for these accommodations, as provided for under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Patricia stood at the podium, her diamond bracelet catching the fluorescent light as she tapped her manicured nails against the microphone. Her smile was tight and did not reach her eyes. Rules exist for everyone, she announced with artificial sympathy. If we make one exception, where does it end? Next, someone will want a skateboard ramp or a chicken coop. Property values depend on uniformity and standards. Several neighbors avoided eye contact as I tried to explain the difference between a medical necessity and a recreational preference. Others nodded along with Patricia's arguments about the greater good of the community. This is not about aesthetics, I insisted, my voice growing frustrated. "This is about my daughter's ability to live safely in her home. Perhaps Oakwood Estates is not the right fit for your special circumstances," Patricia suggested, emphasizing the word special with subtle disdain. That night, I contacted a disability rights attorney named Melissa Chen, who listened to our story with growing concern. The consultation lasted over an hour as I detailed every interaction with the HOA and shared copies of all our documentation. "They cannot legally prevent reasonable accommodations for a disability," she explained, sending me information about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. "Their actions potentially constitute discrimination, especially given the pattern of targeting only your property despite similar modifications elsewhere in the neighborhood." Armed with this knowledge, I drafted a formal letter citing the relevant laws and requesting immediate approval of our medical accommodations. Michael and I believed that once confronted with the legal ramifications of their actions, the HOA board would back down. "We just need to stand firm and educate them," Michael said optimistically. "No one wants a discrimination lawsuit on their hands." I nodded, wanting to believe him, still naive to the depths of Patricia's determination to maintain her control over the neighborhood. As I sealed the envelope containing our letter, I had no idea that we were not dealing with a simple matter of rules and regulations, but with something far more dangerous, a person whose sense of power had become more important than basic human decency. The certified letter containing Emma's medical documents and our formal accommodation request disappeared from the HOA office. When I called to confirm receipt, the part-time secretary claimed no such letter had ever arrived, despite the tracking information proving otherwise. I hand-delivered a second copy directly to Patricia's house the following day, recording the interaction on my phone as she grudgingly accepted the envelope. "I will be sure the board reviews this," she said without looking at the contents. "Though I must warn you that attempting to circumvent standard procedures with legal threats will not endear you to the committee." "These are not threats," I replied evenly. "They are facts about federal disability protection laws that supersede HOA regulations." Patricia's smile tightened. "We shall see about that." 3 days later, I returned home from grocery shopping to find Emma in tears on the back patio. The sensory swing that helped regulate her nervous system had been cut down, the support beams unscrewed from their mounts and left lying on the ground. "I was taking a nap," Emma explained, wiping her eyes. "When I woke up and came outside, it was like this. There was a note, too." The paper was official HOA stationery, informing us that unauthorized structures had been removed in accordance with covenant violations. There was no signature, just the HOA logo and a reference to a bylaw about temporary structures. That night, Michael installed security cameras covering every angle of our property. He positioned them discreetly under eaves and behind potted plants, connected to an app that would alert us to any movement when we were not home. "I cannot believe it has come to this," he muttered as he tested the system. "We moved here for peace and safety." We did not have to wait long for the cameras to prove their worth. The very next afternoon, while Michael was at work and I was taking Emma to a doctor's appointment, the motion alert pinged my phone. The footage showed 2 board members, Patricia's closest allies on the committee, entering our backyard through the side gate. They spent 20 minutes measuring and photographing every modification we had made, occasionally consulting a clipboard and speaking in animated conversation our cameras could not capture clearly. When confronted at the next HOA meeting, they claimed they were conducting a routine inspection, as authorized in the bylaws. What they could not explain was why they had entered without notice or permission, or why only our property had been subjected to such scrutiny. The final confrontation occurred on a Saturday morning as I was helping Emma with her stretching exercises in the backyard. Patricia appeared at our back fence, camera in hand, photographing our therapy equipment with a look of disgust. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching the fence. "May I ask what you are doing?" Patricia did not lower her camera, documenting continuing violations for the board records. "These are not violations. They are legally protected accommodations for a disability, as you have been informed repeatedly." Something in Patricia snapped. Her carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing the ugly truth beneath the veneer of bureaucratic concern. "This neighborhood was perfect before you people moved in," she hissed, her face contorted with undisguised contempt. "I will not let you turn Oakwood Estates into some kind of special needs facility. Do you have any idea what seeing all this equipment does to property values? What happens when potential buyers drive through and see this eyesore?" Her words hung in the air between us, the mask finally removed. This had never been about rules or procedures or property values. It was about her discomfort with disability, with difference, with anything that challenged her narrow vision of perfection. "I suggest you leave our property now," I replied, my voice shaking with anger. "And be aware that this entire interaction has been recorded." Patricia's face paled slightly as she noticed the security camera mounted on our garden shed. She retreated without another word, but the damage was done. Her true feelings had been revealed, captured clearly on our security system. That evening, our doorbell rang. A woman I recognized vaguely from neighborhood gatherings stood on our porch, fidgeting nervously with her purse strap. "My name is Rebecca," she said quietly. "My son has autism. We live on Oak Street. We have been dealing with similar issues with Patricia and the board. I saw your confrontation today. My kitchen window overlooks your backyard. I thought maybe we should talk." By the end of the week, 3 more families had reached out to us with similar stories. The Martinez family had been denied permission to install a wheelchair ramp for their aging grandmother. The Wongs had faced constant harassment over therapy equipment for their son with cerebral palsy. The Johnsons had been threatened with fines for an emotional support animal despite proper documentation. Together, we began documenting every incident, every email, every confrontation. We created a shared drive containing years of evidence showing a clear pattern of discrimination against residents with disabilities or medical needs. "We are not just fighting for Emma anymore," I told Michael as we reviewed the growing documentation. "This is about every family that has been bullied and every family that might move here in the future." The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time, Patricia's absolute authority faced organized resistance from families who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The daily fines began accumulating with methodical precision. $50 per day for the therapeutic swing, $50 per day for the textured pathway, $50 per day for the UV awning. Each week, a new invoice arrived detailing the mounting penalties for our willful noncompliance with HOA regulations. "They cannot legally do this," Melissa Chen, our attorney, assured us during an emergency consultation. "The Fair Housing Act specifically prohibits discriminating against residents with disabilities by refusing reasonable modifications. Everything you have installed qualifies as reasonable accommodation." She drafted a formal cease and desist letter citing the relevant statutes and warning of potential legal action if the harassment continued. The letter was delivered by courier with signature confirmation. Patricia signed for it personally but never responded. Instead, the fines doubled, $100 per day per violation. Emma's health began to suffer from the constant stress and restricted access to her therapy equipment. Her physical therapist documented a 10% decrease in muscle function over just 6 weeks, noting in her official report that the regression was directly linked to lack of access to proper therapeutic supports. She needs consistent therapy to maintain function, Dr. Matthews explained during Emma's quarterly evaluation. Without it, her condition will progress more rapidly. These are not optional treatments, they are medical necessities. I showed him photos of the equipment Patricia had ordered removed, and he immediately provided additional documentation stating explicitly that each item was medically required for Emma's condition. We added his reports to our growing legal file. The situation escalated dramatically when a process server appeared at our door one Tuesday afternoon. The HOA was suing us for willful and persistent violations, threatening property values and community standards. They were seeking an injunction to force us to remove all modifications to our property and pay accumulated fines, now totaling over $12,000. This is actually good news, Melissa assured us when we forwarded the lawsuit documents. They have opened the door to legal discovery. We can now demand all their records, communications, and meeting minutes related to your case and others. The discovery process revealed far more than even we had anticipated. Patricia had doctored meeting minutes to make it appear that the full board had unanimously voted to deny our accommodations, when in fact the matter had never been properly presented for a vote. Email communications showed her instructing the secretary to lose our formal accommodation requests. Most damning of all were text messages between board members discussing ways to encourage families with special needs to move elsewhere to maintain the character of the community. This goes beyond discrimination, Melissa explained grimly as we reviewed the evidence. This shows malicious intent and a conspiracy to violate federal housing laws. Our counter-lawsuit citing discriminatory practices created shockwaves through the community. The local paper ran a front-page story about the situation, complete with photos of Emma and quotes from our legal team about the pattern of harassment. Other families came forward with their own stories, creating a picture of systematic discrimination spanning years under Patricia's leadership. The neighborhood transformed almost overnight. Signs appeared in front yards declaring "Support Disability Rights" or "Stand with the HOA." Former friends stopped speaking to each other at the grocery store. Children were told which houses they could not visit. The community pool became segregated by invisible lines as families chose sides in the escalating conflict. Through it all, Emma watched from her window as the neighborhood she had hoped would be her forever home became an increasingly hostile environment. I found her one evening staring out at the backyard, where her therapy equipment had once stood. "Do you think we should just move, Mom?" she asked quietly. "Find somewhere else where people do not hate us for being different." I sat beside her and took her hand. No one should ever be forced out of their home because of who they are or what they need. This is our home. We have done nothing wrong, and we will not be driven away by ignorance and cruelty. Emma nodded, but I could see the toll the constant conflict was taking on her spirit. The sparkle that had been in her eyes when we first moved in had dimmed, replaced by a wariness that broke my heart. She had experienced discrimination before, the stares in public places, the birthday party invitations that never came, the whispers of other children. But never had the rejection been so organized, so systematic, so deeply personal. Patricia seemed to take our resistance as a personal affront, escalating her campaign against us with renewed vigor. Board meetings became increasingly hostile, with Patricia cutting off any speakers who expressed support for our family. Maintenance requests from families who had sided with us mysteriously went unanswered. The message was clear. Loyalty to Patricia and her vision for the community was the only acceptable position. "We need to be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better," Michael warned one night as we reviewed our mounting legal bills. "People like Patricia do not back down when challenged. They double down." I nodded, thinking of the security camera footage we had collected, the testimonies from other families, the evidence of systematic discrimination that grew stronger each day. What I could not know then was how prophetic Michael's words would prove to be, or how far Patricia would go in her determination to drive us from the neighborhood she considered her personal domain. Emma's 16th birthday dawned bright and clear, a perfect May morning with gentle sunshine and a light breeze that carried the scent of blooming lilacs through the neighborhood. Despite everything, we were determined to make the day special. Emma had requested a small backyard celebration with the few neighborhood friends who had stood by us through the conflict. Michael spent the morning setting up the backyard, reinstalling some of Emma's therapy equipment that had been in storage since the legal battle began. Under our attorney's guidance, we had determined that a temporary installation for a medically necessary birthday accommodation was protected under ADA provisions. The sensory swing returned to its hooks. The texture wall was positioned along the garden path. A small above-ground therapy pool with temperature controls was filled and prepared. The centerpiece was a special enclosed therapy space, a gazebo-like structure with adjustable walls that could be opened or closed depending on Emma's sensory needs and the weather conditions. Inside was her special zero-gravity chair, cooling fans, and emergency medical equipment. The structure had been custom designed by her occupational therapist and represented a significant investment in her health and independence. "It looks amazing," Emma said, tears in her eyes as she surveyed the transformed backyard. A banner reading "Happy 16th Birthday, Emma" fluttered in the breeze above the patio. "Only the best for my girl," Michael replied, kissing the top of her head. "Now we just need to pick up the cake and special order ice cream from Miller's." Emma had specific dietary restrictions, and the local ice cream shop had agreed to make a batch that accommodated her needs. It was an extravagance we rarely indulged in, but 16 was a milestone worth celebrating. "I can stay here while you go," Emma insisted when I hesitated about leaving her alone. "I have my phone, and Mrs. Jenkins is right next door. I just want to enjoy my therapy space before everyone arrives. Please, Mom." She was 16 and constantly supervised due to her condition. A small taste of independence seemed like a reasonable birthday gift, especially with our trusted neighbor nearby and security cameras monitoring the property. "We will be 15 minutes, I agreed, grabbing my purse. "Call immediately if you need anything at all." The grocery store was unusually busy for a Saturday morning. The line at the bakery counter stretched back into the dairy section, and the ice cream shop had a mix-up with our order that required additional time to resolve. Michael and I separated to expedite our errands, him waiting for the cake while I sorted out the ice cream situation. I was just finalizing the payment when my phone vibrated with a security alert. Frowning, I opened the app to see what had triggered the motion sensors. The grainy footage showed 3 people entering our backyard through the side gate. I recognized Patricia immediately, along with 2 other board members, their faces set in determined expressions. My heart rate accelerated as I watched them moving purposefully around our backyard. Patricia was pointing and directing, her body language authoritative and unmistakably aggressive. The others began disconnecting the sensory equipment, unplugging cooling fans and removing shade structures from Emma's therapy enclosure. The camera angle shifted as Emma wheeled herself out onto the patio, clearly confronting the intruders. There was no audio, but I could read the distress in my daughter's body language, the way she gestured frantically at the equipment they were dismantling. The three adults ignored her completely, continuing their systematic destruction of her birthday preparations. After several minutes, they exited through the gate, but the final action sent ice through my veins. Patricia deliberately secured the gate with what appeared to be a padlock or chain, looking back at the enclosure where Emma remained with an expression of grim satisfaction. The angle of the camera could not capture everything, but Emma's increasing distress was unmistakable as she attempted to exit her therapy enclosure, now effectively transformed into a cage under the blazing midday sun. The structure was designed to provide a controlled environment with specific entry and exit points that were now inaccessible to her. "Michael!" I screamed across the store, abandoning the ice cream at the counter. "They have locked Emma in the yard." We raced to the parking lot, leaving our shopping carts behind as panic propelled us toward the car. I tried calling Emma's cell phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. Each unanswered ring increased my terror. "Her medication is inside the house," I gasped as Michael sped toward home, running a yellow light in his desperation. "Her condition cannot tolerate extreme heat without it. She cannot regulate her body temperature properly." The 15-minute drive seemed to stretch into hours. When we finally turned onto our street, the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance sent waves of nausea through my body. Our driveway was blocked by emergency vehicles, forcing us to abandon our car half on the lawn. Our neighbor Mrs. Jenkins approached as we sprinted toward the house, her face streaked with tears. "I heard her calling for help," she sobbed. "I could not get the gate open. They put some kind of bicycle lock on it. I had to call 911. The paramedics emerged from the backyard with Emma on a stretcher, her skin alarmingly red, her breathing shallow. An oxygen mask covered her face, and IV fluids ran into her arm. She looked impossibly small and fragile against the white sheets. "Emma," I cried, rushing toward her. Her eyes fluttered open briefly at the sound of my voice, her hand weakly reaching for mine before falling back limply. "She is suffering from severe heat exhaustion complicated by her underlying condition," the paramedic explained as they loaded her into the ambulance. "Her body temperature was 104 when we arrived. Any longer and this could have been much worse." A police officer approached with a grim expression, notepad in hand. "We have detained 3 individuals for questioning," he explained, his voice professional but unable to fully mask his disgust at the situation. "A neighbor witnessed them deliberately locking the young lady in the enclosure and provided us with a statement. We would like yours as well, but you should go to the hospital with your daughter first. An officer will meet you there." As we climbed into the ambulance beside our daughter, I caught sight of Patricia standing between 2 police officers at the end of our driveway. Her face was pale, her expression indignant as she gestured emphatically, clearly explaining her version of events. The officer's stone-faced response gave me the first glimmer of hope that finally, someone in authority was seeing through her facade. "It was a misunderstanding," I heard her protest as the ambulance doors closed. "We were simply enforcing HOA regulations. How were we supposed to know?" The ambulance pulled away, sirens blaring, carrying my daughter toward urgent medical care while leaving behind the woman whose obsession with rules and control had nearly cost Emma her life. The hospital room filled with the rhythmic beeping of monitors as Emma lay motionless, IV fluids replenishing what the heat had stolen from her body. Her normally pale skin was still flushed red. Her breathing labored despite the oxygen assistance. Michael and I maintained a constant vigil at her bedside, taking shifts only to speak with police and medical personnel. She suffered severe heat exhaustion complicated by medication withdrawal, Dr. Patel explained during her evaluation. Her condition makes her particularly vulnerable to temperature dysregulation. Without the proper medication, her body simply cannot adapt to extreme heat. If your neighbor had not called emergency services when she did, this could have been fatal. The word fatal hung in the air between us, a stark reminder of how close we had come to the unthinkable. Dr. Patel made detailed notes in Emma's chart, documenting every aspect of her condition and the circumstances that had led to her hospitalization. "I have been asked to provide a medical statement for the police investigation," she added. "With your permission, I would like to be extremely thorough about the medical implications of what happened to Emma today." We readily agreed, grateful for her understanding of the severity of the situation. 2 detectives arrived that afternoon, their expressions growing increasingly somber as they reviewed our documentation and the security footage I had forwarded to them from my phone. Detective Garcia, a middle-aged woman with compassionate eyes, asked questions with a precision that suggested she was building a case rather than simply investigating an incident. "We have statements from Mrs. Jenkins and 2 other neighbors who witnessed parts of what happened," she explained. "Combined with your security footage and the medical reports, we have a clear timeline of events." Her partner, Detective Wilson, nodded grimly. "This crosses the line from civil dispute to criminal conduct," he added, taking detailed notes about the pattern of harassment leading up to the incident. "Deliberately locking someone with a known medical condition outdoors without access to medication or appropriate shelter is not a homeowners association matter. It is, at minimum, reckless endangerment." They informed us that Patricia and her 2 accomplices had been taken into custody for questioning, but released pending further investigation. A restraining order had been issued prohibiting them from approaching our property or contacting Emma in any way. While Emma remained in the hospital recovering, events in the neighborhood moved with startling speed. The HOA board called an emergency session, publicly condemning Patricia's actions and claiming ignorance of her personal vendetta against our family. Their carefully worded statement rang hollow against the backdrop of years of documented complicity, but the formal distancing had begun. 3 days after the incident, the district attorney personally called to discuss the case. "We are pursuing enhanced charges due to the targeting of a disabled individual," he explained. "The evidence suggests this was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but the culmination of a sustained campaign of harassment specifically targeting your daughter's disability." News vans lined our street as the story gained national attention. Disability rights organizations issued statements of support, and offers of legal assistance poured in from across the country. The security footage from our backyard, released through our attorney with Emma's face blurred for privacy, played on national news broadcasts alongside commentary from legal experts about the intersection of HOA powers and federal disability protections. When Patricia's booking photo appeared on the evening news alongside the grand jury indictments, the charges were more severe than we had anticipated: unlawful imprisonment, reckless endangerment, and criminal negligence with a hate crime enhancement. The 2 board members who had assisted her faced lesser, but still serious charges as accomplices. The judge denied Patricia bail, our attorney reported after the arraignment. "She was deemed a risk to your family based on her demonstrated pattern of escalating behavior. The prosecution presented evidence that she had researched your property and Emma's condition extensively, suggesting premeditation rather than impulse. The civil case expanded rapidly as additional families came forward with their own experiences of discrimination under Patricia's leadership. What had begun as our isolated struggle became a class-action lawsuit against the HOA for systematic violation of the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. Through it all, Emma recovered slowly in her hospital room, physically healing but carrying new emotional scars from the trauma. She flinched at sudden noises and asked repeatedly if the doors were locked, fears she had never exhibited before. "Will we have to see her in court?" she asked one evening, her voice small. "Will I have to tell everyone what happened?" I held her hand, noting how fragile it felt in mine. "Not if you do not want to," I assured her. "The security footage and medical reports tell the story clearly. You do not have to face her again unless you choose to." Emma nodded, staring out the hospital window at the gathering dusk. "I want to," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. "Not just for me, but for everyone else she hurt. Someone needs to tell the truth about what happened, and I am not ashamed of who I am or what I need." Her courage in that moment, still recovering from a near-fatal experience, humbled me completely. While Patricia's actions had shown the darkest side of human nature, my daughter's response revealed something far more powerful: the unbreakable dignity of a spirit that refused to be diminished by cruelty. 6 months after the incident that nearly claimed Emma's life, our backyard hosted a gathering very different from the birthday celebration that had been so violently interrupted. Neighbors filled the space, many openly weeping as Emma, now fully recovered, cut a ribbon stretched across the entrance to what had once been her therapy enclosure. "I declare the Oakwood Estates Accessibility Center officially open," she announced, her voice clear and confident as applause erupted around her. The restructured HOA board had unanimously approved converting the former community center into an accessible space, offering resources and support for families with disabilities or medical needs. The transformation was funded in part by our civil lawsuit settlement, and in part by community donations that had poured in after the story made national headlines. Patricia's criminal trial had concluded 2 months earlier with a plea agreement that reflected the overwhelming evidence against her. 5 years in prison, followed by thousands of hours of community service in facilities serving disabled individuals. Her accomplices received suspended sentences and extensive community service requirements, their lesser culpability acknowledged in the final judgment. "She never once apologized," Emma observed quietly as we watched families touring the new center, exclaiming over the accessible playground equipment and sensory integration resources. Not during the trial, not during sentencing. She still believes she was right. "Some people cannot admit when they are wrong," I replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But look around you. Her actions exposed a problem that affected countless families, and now real change is happening." Our civil lawsuit settlement had been substantial, covering not only Emma's medical expenses and our legal costs, but establishing a trust to help other families facing housing discrimination based on disability. The HOA bylaws had been completely rewritten with input from disability rights experts, establishing clear protocols for accommodation requests and strict penalties for discrimination. The most profound changes, however, could not be measured in dollars or policy amendments. Former board members who had once enforced Patricia's edicts now volunteered at adaptive sports events organized through the new community center. Neighbors who had initially stood with the HOA approached us with tearful apologies, explaining how easily they had been manipulated by fears about property values and neighborhood character. We never stopped to consider the human cost of those policies, our neighbor Janet admitted during the opening celebration.